This video is a sequel to my video on the original Jet Set Radio I made a couple years ago, so if you want to hear my thoughts on the first game and want a bit of a retrospective, here's a link to it, and be sure to come back. If you just want to hear about future, then enjoy. The early 90s were a great time for Sega with the hit console, the Mega Drive, that stood against the Super Nintendo as a serious competitor. While the console wars were only glorified during the American market, I think most children could only afford either a Super Nintendo or a Sega Mega Drive. I was lucky enough to have the best of both worlds, allowing me to play games such as Donkey Kong Country and Sonic. However, midway through the 90s, things were changing for Sega as the new kid on the block, the Sony PlayStation, entered the ring and won against the Saturn. I never got a Saturn until 2010, which is the same as I missed out on getting these games while they were at a reasonable price. Before the millennium began, Sega had one more console up their sleeve, the Dreamcast, which I did play when it was brand new. Unfortunately, it didn't make a dent, as just a year after the new millennium, the Dreamcast was about to end, and so did Sega's console practices. It's a shame because this is where I feel the company was at their most creative. It's weird to think about it now, as many people who grew up with Sega during the 2000s and onwards first discovered them after they left the console business, but for me and other fans, it was surreal seeing series like Sonic and Crazy Taxi being moved to Sony and Nintendo consoles. The new millennium was a strange time, and while some people may have seen it as a decline, to me, Sega was still kicking, showing that they still had the talent. Some of their Dreamcast titles got a second life on the GameCube and the PlayStation 2, and there were plenty of new titles. Amusement visions were making arcade quality gems on the GameCube like Super Monkey Ball and F-Zero DX. Shinobi jumped into the third dimension on the PS2, and Sonic garnered new fans with the likes of Heroes and Riders. While they were out of the console business, the new millennium brought someone new into the ring, that being Microsoft, and their console, the Xbox. Released in stores in 2001 in North America and 2002 in Europe and Japan, and to this day the Xbox brand still exists. Some people even call the Xbox the spiritual successor to the Dreamcast, as the Dreamcast ran on a modified Windows CE operating system, as well as using Microsoft's DirectX graphics engine. The controllers are identical with only slight tweaks. There were even talks of making the Xbox able to play Dreamcast games before it was turned down. What made me come to this conclusion was the deal between Sega and Microsoft, which brought 11 exclusive titles to the console, with the first 4 revealed being Sega GT2, Panzer Dragoon Ultra, Gun Valkyrie, and the main focus of this video, Jet Set Radio Future. Future is somewhat of a fitting word, as while it was originally announced as a sequel to the first game on the same system, it felt more like a soft reboot than a follow-up, as you don't need to have played the original as it has a similar plot. It reminded me of another series. It was on new hardware and a new future for the company. I played the original numerous times even after my video on it nearly 2 years ago, and I love it to bits. However, I never played Future prior to Christmas 2023. It was one of those Holy Grail games that I would have loved to play alongside Knees, but it was always out of my reach, since I never owned an original Xbox, which is the only official way to play it, and I heard a while back that the emulation for the game had some issues until recently. It wasn't until last Christmas that my family got me a second-hand Xbox, and my younger brother brought me a copy of the game, and since then I played through the campaign twice. I was excited to play it through, and I was wondering if it lived up to my expectations, and for the most part, it did. So for the rest of the video, let me talk about how Jet Set Radio Future has soul. Despite being released 2 years after the original, It's actually more of a reimagining of the first game with the same bunch of rad-tad status taking down the man that is the Ricardo group, spraying every part of Tokyo Nation Sea. There are a lot of differences, such as Captain Onishima being replaced with a much more psychotic cop, Captain Hayashi, who appears more often in the story than his predecessor. The Ricardo group have a lot more presence in the plot, as rather than being only revealed halfway through the first game, are revealed from the get-go, controlling the strings of the police force and the streets. New playable characters were added, like Jazz, and some of the old characters are referred to by their Japanese names, such as Piranha, now being referred to as Buddy, and Mew being referred to as Vince. Roles have changed too, as instead of starting out as Beat, who, by the way, is considered as the poster boy, you start out as Yo-Yo, who has a lot more involvement in the plot, and Cube, who is now leader of one of the rival teams, Poison Jam. The plot is a roller coaster going from one scenario to another, but things just kind of happen out of the blue, starting out simple by spraying graffiti on the streets to going up against super goons in a few hours. You are still sticking around, spraying graffiti like in the original, but instead of the time-based missions, it plays more like an open sandbox, grinding at your leisure, which is nice if you just want to mess around with the controls and the physics. The game feels better than the original, with new abilities to traverse. It's a shame that Future still uses the trigger to snap the camera behind you instead of manually controlling it yourself, like in the HD port of the original Jet Set Radio. I can understand why the original didn't, since the Dreamcast only had one analog stick, but the Xbox has two of them. The right stick doesn't even do anything. It probably was a choice that stayed when it was originally a Dreamcast title. I think not having the right control stick to move the camera can cause some issues when platforming, especially when in vertical focus areas where the game can punish you for falling. There are some tools you can ascend easy, like grinding on phone poles, but there are some areas where you have to take the long way to climb back up. In the original, there wasn't any other way to gain speed that wasn't moving forward or going downhill. So if you were grinding with not much momentum, then you were grinding at a snail's pace. But now you have options to keep your momentum, such as pressing X or Y in a rhythmic succession, which allows you to perform tricks on rails. You can also press the B button to perform a dash if you have 10 spray cans or more. It's a neat tool, allowing for more creative platforming segments, and it's useful in races. War runs were in the previous game, but I feel Future takes them to the next step, allowing you to find creative ways to perform tricks and get to cool places, like for example, in the sewer level, there is one room that gets at a dead end with nothing of value, but you can continue wall jumping to gain additional points and unlock a collectible graffiti. The skaters can perform a handstand on half pipes by pressing the Y button when you get to the top, allowing them to catch more airtime on their next jump. Now this can be finicky as you automatically grind on rails, which the top of the half pipes count as. This sometimes leads me to accidentally grind when I just want a handstand. Grinding being automatic has its pros and cons. As for one, you don't have to worry about pressing a button like in Tony Hawk, but sometimes you accidentally get yacht on the rails when you just want to land, and in moments like this boss battle, it can be irritating. Oh yeah, this game has combat, and, well, I don't like it. There are times where you are yacht with a group of police officers, but all you have to do is run into them, or in some cases boost into them, and then just spray them while they're on the floor. The game has a few boss battles that can either be beaten in settings, or in this one against a giant Spider-Man that can take a while if you accidentally get knocked down as you fall on multiple levels of stairs, and grinding all the way back up is a slow process. The less I have to mention about the final boss, the better. I didn't think the combat is what the series needed, it's just the joy of skating and spraying can hold up the game. Now the idea of taking down helicopters by the power of art is funny. Cadden Rivals is back, which has been more streamlined as it is easy to hold the trigger to spray graffiti on their bats. In fact, the whole use of graffiti has been streamlined, as instead of performing arithmetic events like in the old game, you just have to press or hold the triggers to TAD wars. I do miss the QTE moments, as it forced me to strategize what wars I had to TAD first before the clock stepped to me. But I can understand why it was removed, as it can break the momentum, and with how the game focuses on platforming compared to its predecessor, it could be difficult to implement them. I know that Bomb Rush Cyberfun came out, and while I haven't played it yet, it seems to find a good balance between the two. Future is more about how to TAD the wars rather than which war to TAD first. Besides combat and TAD wars, there are other missions, such as races coming back, which are a lot more fun, plus 2 new minigames. The first one is Jet Flag, where you have to collect the most flags before the rival gang members do, and Death Ball, where you have to get to the goal with your teammate holding a ball before your rivals knock it down. Jet Flag is fun, but I found the new Death Ball to be brain dead, as in the story mode you can easily grab the ball and hold onto it until the goal without even passing it to your partner. These games are unfortunately only used one time in the campaign, but are available as optional missions as well as in the multiplayer, which sadly I never tried due to not having anyone to play with me. While I had some issues with Future, I still think it's a good game that could easily be fixed with a sequel. But what makes it from a good one to one I love is its vibe, from its aesthetics, soundtrack, characters, and its personality. I've always put gameplay above all else, which is why I've criticized certain games, but I think there are more than just how a game plays that can make me enjoy it. A game can have the most tight mechanics, but tight mechanics can only do so much for my enjoyment if it's lacking in any charm. I normally don't usually judge a book by its cover, but in some cases, appearances matter. While some games just throw whatever clothes they have in the wardrobe, Jet Set Radio is strutting its stuff on the Gaia runway. The story at face value is nothing special, but the amalgamation between its roller station, CAD gameplay, art style, and music helps the world building and narrative of Future about a band of misfits, sticking it to the man with the freedom and self-expression. The world of Future seems imbued with the corrupt corporations having their dirty hands on the police force. And while there are some areas that look pretty snazzy, such as 99th Street, there are certain areas, such as backloggd Heights, where people live in crappy buildings stacked on top of one another. Like its predecessor, Future uses cel shading that mimics the street art style with amazing character designs by Ryuta Uda, one of my all-time favorite character artists. The characters you unlock, while not having a lot of depth, have unique styles inspired by many of the fashion trends in late 90s Japan and US. Some of my favorite designs have to go to Viv with her Gekura outfit, Cube with a goth look, Biddy with her more western flares, and Beats casual but futurism look. I loved all the dances they perform when you complete a mission, select them on the character select screen, or when you leave them on idle. It's so cool that the majority of the cast have their own unique dances, giving off their own sense of identity. The art style isn't just for show, as it plays a crucial part in the gameplay department, as well as a way to interpret the world of Tokyo with the main mechanic of the game, graffiti. Graffiti walks on a line between being a leader and a form of expression, but has been a crucial thing to express art, a form of rebellion, and a way to raise political concerns throughout history, more crucially between the 1960s in America and onwards. While I go outside and experience so-called graffiti that either basically calls someone out for being a creep or a doodle of human genitalia. There has been plenty of talented art throughout the decades that are full of colour. Some graffiti art has been displayed in museums thanks to certain people who have appreciated this style of art. Future has plenty of graffiti created by plenty of artists, and you can even create your own, giving you a safe way to fully express your own art. No, I don't think it works too well with an analog stick compared to paint or drawing tablet. It uses its graffiti feature as a way to tell its rebellious story. A Jet Set Radio game would have been perfect for the Wii U, using a gamepad to draw your own graffiti. The music is something you may have at least heard once if you have ever played any Sega crossover game or are aware of the series. I know my first experience with the soundtrack was thanks to Sega Superstar Tennis, and even before I touched Future, I used to listen to many of the tracks like Concept of Love by Hideki Nakamura constantly. It has become one of my all-time favourites alongside the original and these. It has a decent range of remixes of old tracks such as Yet Mom Sleep, That's Enough, and Rock It On, as well as brand new tracks from a handful of genres that were somewhat popular in places in Japan, the UK, and America between the late 90s and early 2000s, such as hip-hop, breakbeat, acid jazz, rock, and more. And as a Brit who grew up with a lot of those and still listens to them, Future's soundtrack just hits with me. Artists like Richard Zatz, Guitar Vader, Scapegoat Watts, the Yax Brothers, Fizz, and many more bring their talent to the table, and most of them are worth to listen to. My favourites include Aisle 10 by Scapegoat Watts, I Love You by Guitar Vader, Koto Stomp by the Yax Brothers, and What About the Future by Richard Zatz. The only one I didn't really like was Birthday Cake, which I felt played way more than some of the songs during my 2 playthroughs, which is a shame because while I've been working on this video, I've been listening to the artists of Birthday Cake, Cibo Mato's other songs, and they have been amazing to listen to. If you like something with a bit of funk and rap, then I recommend listening to their work. Birthday Cake was the reason I would have loved to have the option to choose my songs, instead of the game choosing it for me, but I guess having it chosen for me feels authentic and diegetic, since these songs are played on the pirate radio station Jet Set Radio, run by DJ Professor K. I like how each song transitions to one another, and how Professor K talks about the latest news happening in Tokyo, like an actual radio station. I have found plenty of artists to listen to thanks to video games growing up, such as Offspring thanks to Crazy Taxi, and Red Hot Chili Peppers thanks to the Tony Hawk games. And if I played this game as a kid, this would have been all over my MP3 player. Were there any artists you got into thanks to a video game, show, or movie? I would love to know in the comments below. One of the more popular genres in the track was hip-hop. No, hip-hop is often associated as another word for rap. It's actually a combination of different elements, those being DJing, beatboxing, graffiti, MCing, and breakdancing. It started out in the 1970s, Bronx, founded by African American and Caribbean immigrants during a time of recession, and was used as a social movement to speak out against social issues like repression, police brutality, racism, and poverty, but most of all, it's just a way for anyone to express themselves. It gained a popular movement globally during the MTV boom in the 80s, and was popular when these games were made. The hip-hop songs in Future don't have any political messages as far as I'm aware, but most of these elements are used to show not just the status rebellious side, but also to express themselves and be teens. I recommend checking out History of Hip-Hop in the Bronx, Arts in the City, and the article Hip Hop, a Culture of Vision and Voice, if you want to know more about the history of the genre. Extreme sports were popular at the time, thanks to the likes of Tony Hawk, so there were a lot of extreme sports titles during that generation, But besides the Tony Hawk games and maybe SSX, I cannot think of any games that people still talk about fondly other than the Jet Set Radio duology, and that is thanks to all the combination of elements I've mentioned. I think it's also thanks that the duology were mostly made up of the younger staff at Sega at the time who were interested in a lot of things that young people were interested at the time, that they thought would be cool to put into a video game rather than say what executives thought were popular. While Sega didn't have a console to call home anymore, I think Future plus the other titles during the 6th console generation so that they still had the same creativity they had when they did. Future is something I could easily recommend to people if it wasn't for being stuck on the original Xbox and 360, as it was unlucky not to be compatible with the new Xbox consoles. It's one of those games best to play anywhere you can, as I don't think we'll see a port due to the many music license issues. While the likes of Nakamura's and Zack's music wouldn't be too much of a problem, everyone else would be a problem to get the rights back, as for one, some of the tracks are owned by Time Warner, and the other record label company Grand Royal disappeared soon after Future's original release. It's not impossible, but it would be a challenge. Sega themselves haven't forgotten the series, as the likes of Beat and Gum have appeared in many crossovers. Plenty of merchandise is still being made, plus at the time of recording this video, the GGs are going to make a comeback with a new installment, which will be released at some point in the future. Fans are still keeping the legacy alive with fan-made radio stations, videos on YouTube, artwork, and even games inspired by the series like Bomb Rush Cyberpunk and Hover. Let me know if you played Jet Set Radio or Future in the comments below, and I hope you enjoyed the video. I would hopefully see you in the future.